Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to an all-new Munro Minute Dramataseries. Now, I just got over a sore throat, so I sort of don't feel like doing my dramatic reading of Robinson Crusoe today. I'm still going to read Robinson Crusoe, and I'm going to pick off where I'm pretty sure I left off. See, it's right here. But today, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try using more of a realistic narrator voice. I finally stumbled upon some really good narrations of some audiobooks on archive.org, which is a fantastic website, by the way. Holds all sorts of archived photos and music and videos, among tons of other things. And I've been starting to wonder if my narrating voice is going to be able to match up to theirs. Now, I know from my own personal standpoint, soothingness, which is how I picked out the specific narrations that I liked, is something of quality that's very important to me. But to professional narration critics, if such a thing exists, I'm sort of assuming that there is, there's a lot more criteria at stake, such as the sustenance of the voice and really how fun the voice is and how interesting it keeps itself without being overly dramatic. So right now I'm going to test this all out while still reading from Robinson Crusoe. These wise and sober thoughts continued all the while the storm lasted, and indeed some time after. But the next day the wind was abated, and the sea calmer, and I began to be a little inured to it. However, I was very grave for all that day, being also a little seasick still. But towards night the weather cleared up, the wind was quite over, and a charming fine evening followed. The sun went down perfectly clear, and rose so the next morning, having little or no wind, and a smooth sea, the sun shining upon it, the sight was, as I thought, the most delightful that ever I saw. I had slept well in the night, and was now nor more seasick, but very cheerful, looking with wonder upon the sea that was so rough and terrible the day before, and could be so calm and so pleasant in so little a time after. And now, lest my good resolutions should continue, my companion, who had enticed me away, comes to me. "Well, Bob," says he, clapping me upon the shoulder, "how do you do after it? I warrant you were frightened, weren't you, last night, when it blew but a capful of wind?" "A capful, do you call it?" said I. "It was a terrible storm." "A storm, you fool, you," replies he. "Do you call that a storm? Why, it was nothing at all. Give us but a good ship and sea room, and we think nothing of such a squall of wind as that. But you're but a freshwater sailor, Bob. Come, let us make a bowl of punch, and we'll forget all that. D'ye see what charming weather 'tis now? To make short this sad part of my story, we went the way of all sailors. The punch was made, and I was made half drunk with it. And in that one night's wickedness I drowned all my repentance, all my reflections upon my past conduct, all my resolutions for the future. In a word, as the sea was returned to its smoothness of surface and settled calmness by the abatement of that storm, so the hurry of my thoughts being over, my fears and apprehensions of being swallowed up by the sea being forgotten, and the current of my former desires returned, I entirely forgot the vows and promises that I made in my distress. I found, indeed, some intervals of reflection, and the serious thoughts did, as it were, endeavor to return again sometimes. But I shook them off, and roused myself from them, as it were from a distemper, and applying myself to drinking and company, soon mastered the return of those fits, for so I called them. And I had, in 5 or 6 days, got as complete a victory over my conscience as any young fellow that resolved not to be troubled with it could desire. But I was to have another trial for it still, and Providence, as in such cases generally it does, resolved to have me entirely without excuse for it. For if I would not take this for a deliverance, the next thing was to be such a one as the worst and most hardened wretch among us would confess both the danger and the mercy. The 6th day of our being at sea, we came into Yarmouth Roads, the wind having been contrary, and the weather calm. We had made but little way since the storm. Here we were obliged to come to an anchor, and here we lay, the wind continuing contrary, viz., at southwest, for 7 or 8 days, during which time a great many ships from Newcastle came into the same roads, as the common harbor where the ships might wait for a wind for the river. We had not, however, rid here so long, but we should have tied up the river, but that the wind blew too fresh, and after we had lain 4 or 5 days, blew very hard. However, the roads being reckoned as good as a harbor, the anchorage good, and our ground tackle very strong, our men were unconcerned, and not in the least apprehensive of danger, but spent the time in rest and mirth, after the manner of the sea. But the 8th day, in the morning, the wind increased, and we had all hands at work to strike our topmasts, and make everything snug and close, that the ship might ride as easy as possible. By noon the sea went very high indeed, and our ship rode forecastle in, shipped several seas, and we thought once or twice our anchor had come home, upon which our master ordered out the sheet anchor, so that we rode with 2 anchors ahead, and the cables veered out to the better end. By this time it blew a terrible storm indeed, and now I began to see terror and amazement in the faces even of the seamen themselves. The master, though vigilant in the business of preserving the ship, yet as he went in and out of his cabin by me, I could hear him softly to himself say several times, "Lord, be merciful to us. We shall be all lost. We shall be all undone," and the like. During these first hurries I was stupid, lying still in my cabin, which was in the steerage, and cannot describe my temper. I could ill resume the first penitence which I had so apparently trampled on, and hardened myself against. I thought the bitterness of death had been past, and that this would be nothing too, like the first. But when the master himself came to me, as I said just now, and said we should be all lost, I was dreadfully frightened. I got up out of my cabin, and looked out, but such a dismal sight I never saw. The sea ran mountains high, and I broke upon us every 3 or 4 minutes. When I could look about, I could see nothing but distress round us. 2 ships that rode near us we found had cut their masts by the board, being deep laden, and our men cried out that a ship which rid about a mile ahead of us was foundered. 2 more ships, being driven from their anchors, were run out of the roads to sea, and all adventurers, and that not with the mast standing. The light ships fared the best, as not so much laboring in the sea, but 2 or 3 of them drove and came close to us, running away with only their sprit sail out before the wind.